Well, without further ado, I shall pass you on to Giles.
Thank you very much. Appreciate everyone coming. I was going to say we nearly made it up here in one piece, but all the trains were conspiring against us, trying to avoid this from happening. So thank you for everyone for coming. I'd like to start with a question, 2 questions actually. How many people here have had a conversation with stakeholders, with clients, with managers around the importance of data value? A few. Okay. How many people have tried to measure it? Oh, there's a couple. Brave. I appreciate your efforts. I'd like to get your opinions on this, but it's a hard thing to do. It's a very difficult thing to quantify. Simply by Googling, or ChatGPT these days, what is data value, we get the measurable impact and insights or advantages of an organization gains from analyzing and leveraging their data. But what does that actually mean? In itself is a bit of a meaningless statement. But it's the measurable bit which has gotten me. I've struggled with this for years, as we will see. But what are we trying to do? And I've started looking, or did eventually start looking at, are there business decisions being made off the back of this data which I can quantify? Are there dollar or pound investments being made, or are there outcomes which I can then tie back to the data which provided it? And that is a complete rabbit hole. I would not recommend doing this. It doesn't have a dollar or pound value. It is a complete waste of time even trying to do that. It is, no, just don't go there. Recommended. So, before we go further, I obviously wanted to introduce myself. I am Giles Middleton. I now find myself as head of data as part of an investment company, Orbis Investments, who are primarily driven now by spreadsheets. I find myself going back 25 years. So, anything to do with Databricks or any other modern platform is a wishful dream at the moment, but hopefully that will soon change. We shall see how far that goes. But before we go further, I want to introduce an old friend of mine. Lovely data graveyard. I've had the joy of inheriting several of these, particularly when I joined UBS. Part of the investment bank that I joined, I inherited or took over a team of DBAs and developers. We were developers in those days before data engineering became fashionable. And our job was to collect all of the trading data and execution data of all of the market executions that UBS were doing globally. Bring these into various databases and data warehouses, collect, polish, make them all lovely, for various reasons. And it was those reasons I tried foolishly to dig into and ask, why are we collecting this data? Terabytes of data a week, diligently, hundreds of databases, creating these lovely data sets, normalized information. Great, fine, okay. We're collecting that for compliance and for finance and for various people across the organization who can get insights into the data. Okay, what insights would they be? Don't know. Okay, good. What do we produce from these databases and warehouses? Reports, lots of reports, excellent. To whom? Don't know. Okay, fine. I made the mistake of looking into this and found out that 40% of the reports were being sent to people no longer at the company. So we had a lot of zombies. You hang around graveyard, you get a lot of zombies. These are things, processes that happen that have no purpose, no reason for being. So that was a mistake. I then asked the silly question as well, do we give end users access to these databases? Can we just let them query the data? Oh, no, they'll break the bloody thing. Fine, okay. So this is a waste of time. We're spending $8 million a year collecting all of this data for purposes we cannot describe. Don't worry, I was told. There's plenty more where that came from. We do it twice. Okay, fantastic. So that's $16 million we're spending, not $8 million annually we're spending. So this has bugged me for decades, this problem. And I cannot manage what I cannot measure. It drives me up the wall. I want to be able to find out how to measure not just the cost, but there are lots of ways of managing and maintaining costs now with FinOps and all of the tools now coming out of Databricks. But I want to expand on what I think should be the definition of data value in a way that we can measure it, in a way we can expose this and actually analyze this. And that's what I'd like to share. So to me, Data value is a combination of 4 different things that I think we can collect. I realize one of those items here is value, so we're measuring data value by that value. I'll come on to that in a minute. That's poor naming, but I work in finance. I need to understand value versus cost, profit and loss. What are we spending? What are we getting out of this? Also, how well are we governing? How well are we managing this data? Is it secure? Is it well managed? Is it governed? Can people get access? Can people discover this data? You know, basic things like that. And then what are we wasting? There's a lot of conversation at the moment with FinOps. Data is not immune to waste. And so can we expose that waste? And that's really what I want to dive into now and dig into ways I think we can measure this. But I have to caveat, this is not a complete solution. This is not, I'm not going to hand over the code because primarily I haven't been able to have the time to write it all. But this is really a framework or a thesis of how I think we can do this. Most of this will be customizable, or I hope is customized to your own use cases. But at least if you take anything away from this, it's the idea that a lot of this, should we be able to capture this information, expose it, it becomes very, very powerful for a CEO, CFO, head of data. Anyone in that realm would find use in what I'm talking about today, I hope, at least. So, if value is not a dollar number based on business decisions, what is it? So to me, value from data is simply the unique business use cases derived from a data product or a data set. How many different unique processes are reading from your data per day? I'm not talking about a select star from running 500 times. That's someone being a fool. I'm talking about actual reports running on it. You know, if that report runs 50 times, that's one use case. So that's one. Are there different dashboards running from it? Are there different reports? Are there ad hoc? Is there data science being run on this? Is machine learning being pumped from this? So adding that up and monitoring that is value you are getting from your data. If you're not running anything on your data, it has, well, it's not just no value, it has negative value because you are spending money collecting this data to do nothing with it. So we'll come more onto that later. But the question is, how can we measure this? Now, I didn't mention the fact that we want to try and ignore the curation of that data. So any pipelines pumping data in, we want to try and ignore that if we can. And any kind of foolishness that people are just, you know, playing around with the table. So really, the first thing is, what do we mean by a data product? Because you could potentially look at every single table in your data lakehouse and say that that is a data product. Well, in fact, I tend to think a bit differently in that a silver table, or in this case, this collection of tables that I've given here as an example, to me is a single derived data product for measurement of how much value we're getting from the data, because the gold tables are simply aggregations of, for fast read purposes and reporting, off the basis of the silver table. So therefore, to me, that is a single collection of data of which I want to see how much value I get from that, rather than individually on the gold tables, which are just different views in my mind. You may have a different opinion, by all means, but that's the one I tend to take in this instance. But what are we looking for? The system tables are the gold mine here. The system tables have been growing. They have been getting more and more feature rich. Anyone from a kind of DBA background, going back a few years, will be inherently knowledgeable about system tables in other platforms like Oracle, SQL Server, and so on. And I'm very glad to see that a lot of this has taken root inside of Databricks. But we want to have a look at the query history on a lot of these objects and be able to filter on the unique queries per day being run on this. We could look at filtering out select star from, if we possibly can, and have a look at the lineage behind that as well to see if we can remove some of these populating data flows, pushing data into the pipeline. But really it's how many unique reads have I got on my data product? How well is that being read? I tend to create my own metadata. I'll come more into that in a minute to define what I mean by a data product and capture information about that. But really it's a case of understanding the system tables, being able to pull out those unique reads and just keeping a score of that as you go along. So that's a great way of getting that first metric. Second one is cost. So what cost am I looking at? You can query a lot of cost inside of Databricks. It's getting much, much better to track the costs. The system tables are coming into play. They're getting more mature as we go along. But the actual cost I want to know is the cost of creating this data product. So what the pipeline cost of that, not the entire cluster, workspace, everything else that's going on in the background. Just what does it cost me to create this data product? And again, sorry, I forgot to mention that on a day-by-day basis, pumping data into your data product will vary because you don't have the same number of records going into that. Therefore, the same amount of compute will vary on a day-by-day basis. So a little bit of sense around how many, division of the number of rows you actually populate your data product with daily, say an average DBU cost per million rows would be a good thing to capture. Therefore, that evens out the fluctuations in data and therefore gives you a measurable daily count of how much is this costing me to run or create this data product and capture that. Again, this comes down to system tables. So job costs, we can now capture pipeline execution costs in the system tables and have a look and query that information. In a similar way, we could query the unique number of queries per database. We can look at the job costs. Now, I understand that a single pipeline doesn't necessarily populate a single data product. You're going to get complex data pipelines. And so that does demand that we have some sense around how we allocate or stripe the costs of a particular pipeline into whatever data products they happen to populate. But again, this is not outside of the realms of possibility. If you collect a lot of your metadata and definitions of data products, you can then allocate that to a particular pipeline and say a third of the cost is for this one, and this one, or however you author your pipelines. And tagging can also come into this. Tagging is a very new, very useful way of doing that. Being able to tag your pipelines or your data products with a cost code is a great way, another option to look at things and do that. And so being able to say on a month-by-month basis, I can see with the average DBU cost for my pipelines, be that aggregated together to get a trend line, or whether it's on an individual pipeline-by-pipeline basis to see whether or not those are significantly changing, is quite a powerful thing to expose as part of a dashboard. Waste, my pet peeve. This one I do lean into quite a lot. This is inspired by a lot of the FinOps work done with clients over the years, and understanding that at least still 30% of spend in public cloud is considered to be waste. But that looks a lot of infrastructure, that looks a lot of storage, and so on and so forth. What are we talking about when we talk about data waste inside of a platform like Databricks? And a lot of that, in my mind, comes down to duplication. So having the same data in completely different data products being populated by different pipelines for reasons unknown, for whatever. That's just historic reasons. That could be just people didn't know the data existed, what have you. And the identification of those, again, I started looking down statistical similarity comparisons, and that's a rabbit hole. Don't even go there. That's just nuts. The answer is a little bit simpler than that, thankfully. But also waste includes things like unused data products I mentioned before, because it's one thing having just a small number of use cases for your data products, but if you have none at all, that is really painful. So it's worth highlighting in its own right 0 uses, because then what are you doing? It's a total waste of time and really needs to be risen and made aware of. Obviously, when we're talking about duplicative data, we want to talk around transactional operational data. If we're looking at things like static reference data, that will be consumed into pipelines a lot. So we want to try and not concentrate on reference data. And I'm thinking like customer address information or trading instrument static, things like that. We want to try and move those because they're used everywhere. But if you are looking at customer transactions, and we have 6 pipelines of customer transactions in 7 different data products, this is a waste of our money. That is what I mean by waste. As a bonus, lifecycle policies on the storage underneath. We're getting a little bit again into the FinOps, and I'm trying not to do that too much, but surely we should have automatic lifecycle policies on our S3 buckets or storage accounts. And that should be quite easy to expose through Terraform scripts or API calls to see whether or not they exist. But again, this comes back to lineage. Lineage is an easier answer than trying to work out statistical similarity. Do my pipelines come from the same source? Do they come from the same table in the same source? Do they come from the same file that I produce every day? It's a much simpler way of being able to highlight duplicates. Now, it doesn't guarantee that we have duplicate data in our data products, but it's a strong indication that we have duplicated effort and duplicated data being washed around. So that is a very strong indicator that we have these and should be included as part of our waste calculation. This is probably the hardest of the metrics to really nail down. So more thought is needed around this to understand, what it means to be a complete duplicate. It's very hard to get right, but the lineage, I'm hoping, is going to be the key to this moving forwards. Finally, governance. So what is, how do we measure good governance? It's, are we doing governance? It's quite simple. Are we either doing it or we're not doing it, or, partially implemented, fully implemented? I would hope that as part of an implementation of, deploying data products, there is a minimum set of static data or reference data, governance data applied to that, data classification, data security tags, things like that applied to it. So this is where tagging comes in very handy in this. Have my data products had business metadata applied to them? Do I have a separate governance tool in this? And so this is very much about auditing the tags that we've got. We can apply tags at various levels within our data products, at the schema, at the catalog, but also at the table within, and even at the column level we can apply tags. But also we can query those tags. We can see how many we've got for our data products. How many columns have we got for our data product? Have they all been tagged? Right, it's a score between 0 and 100. It's quite simple on that, but not everything will need a tag. So there's a little bit more intelligence needed around what actually needs to be governed and what doesn't need to be governed. But again, that comes down to how you keep track and define your derived data products I mentioned before. So now we know a little bit more about these measures. We should think about capturing this metadata. The system tables are not in perpetuity. They have a lifespan. I can't remember what it is now, but I think a lot of the information does just age out and get archived away. I highly recommend capturing this information as part of your own pipelines, to create one to capture metadata and store that inside of somewhere. I'm a big fan of administration schemas within my catalogs. I create an admin schema for a number of reasons. One could be define what I mean by my data products and the derived data products, capturing tagging information, capturing group access detail. There's a number of examples here, but also capturing the logs of some of these metrics would be a great place to keep in an admin schema. I tend to build, I come from a DBA background. I've done that a lot over the years. Highly recommend it. What you put in there, up to you, but capturing those stats would be a great place to go. So the question is, why are we doing this? What am I hoping to get out of this? I can create a lot of this, but what is the sort of information that we would like to get? Pardon me, I've got one more slide that I hadn't gone into. Metrics. I wanted to talk more about metrics, but unfortunately I haven't been given access. So apologies, I can't really talk about metrics, but these feel like they would be business metrics or business driver metrics. Hopefully soon this gets released, and then we can actually store the definitions of these as metrics rather than having to go through a lot of boilerplate code, which may end up being the case. So I will skip on and talk about the why. And if I can get to the slide, and it will come up, yes. Eventually what I'd like to do is track these metrics over time, because this is where the power of these come into it. Few data products come out of the box fully utilized. I can imagine that a major release of dozens of new data products would end up dropping the overall aggregated value of your data platform temporarily, because not everyone knows those data products come into existence as soon as they are released. They're released for a purpose. That could be reg reporting, client reporting, something else. That's fine. But discovery takes time. Building those use cases, building those extra reads, building those business use cases takes time. And so being able to track the orange line, by the way, if you cannot see that particularly well, is an example of what I believe would happen where after a major release, you'd get a drop in value, but then that would start to build back up again. Your waste, conversely, would peak after a major release and then slowly start to dip away. How fast that value increases is a direct indicator of how easy your data is to discover, how good your data discovery is. So that's an interesting point to look at. How well you govern your data also can be impacted by major releases because, again, being the real world, not every single data product comes out fully formed with every single tag applied immediately or well governed. It takes time to mature. So tracking that over time gives a maturity of that. You'd hope that we get better at authoring some of these pipelines. Our efficiency gets better, therefore the cost over time per pipeline should reduce, we hope. But that may not always be the case. We could see a different scenario. We could see a scenario where on a release, our value drops, but never really recovers because we're creating all these data products, but for singular purposes, and no one discovers them, and no one can use them. But that would be highlighted quite effectively here as a scenario similar to this. So our waste would therefore increase over time because we're creating lots of data products with a very small number of use cases. So therefore not particularly efficient. Are we duplicating a lot of this effort? Again, could potentially be highlighted here. Again, and our governance, well, that could go either way. So the different scenarios you can get from tracking these over time get very interesting. Another possibility is we don't have any major releases. We have been tracking our existing data products, but haven't done a major release for a very long time. But still, changes may happen to your data product or the metrics that you measure over this time. People can still discover them. People can still use and get access to your data products, therefore increasing your value. Even if you haven't made any new ones recently, then that can still happen. Therefore, your waste should, inverse, reduce over that time. But other interesting things might come out of this. You may, even though you haven't done any major releases, the cost is reducing per DBU. That could be behind the scenes. Databricks is improving the use of serverless, improving the efficiency of the serverless or even the compute offering. The auto clustering is getting better. Liquid clustering is improving in its efficiency. I know we've all looked at the marketing slides saying the costs are reducing, but we've not actually seen our own evidence of it. This could be that. It's evidence on the page. And finally, the worst case scenario, the bit that I fear the most, oops, I've gone the wrong way, is this one. Nothing happens, nothing changes. No new requests for information, no new requests for data, no new releases, no change in governance, no improvement in cost. That is a surefire sign that you're heading for a graveyard and you've got zombies. That is the bit that worries me the most. And so if you see this, then it's time for alarm bells to start ringing. So if you see zombies, clearly the best thing for it is to, I'll leave that to Shaun of the Dead to talk us through. But, nobody needs or wants to have that scenario. So hopefully, what you measure, what you see, if you take this away and are able to implement something like this, can get insights into the use and value of your data platform. Keep your CFO, CTO very happy. Thank you.